Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Keith, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing good, thanks. How are you?
Doing great. Appreciate you taking a few minutes here we got a good agenda. Talk about you and I engaged on LinkedIn regarding, I think we were talking about AFAs and some other interesting topics and whether or not law firm clients are actually ready for AFAs. And we had a good dialogue. So I figured a conversation here on the podcast would be a good idea.
Sure. I appreciate the invite. And I always like talking shop. So excited to be here. Thanks. Thanks again.
Good stuff, man. So I took a look at your LinkedIn. So you've been in legal for quite some time. You're an MBA, not a JD, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you are head of pricing and analytics at Catton, but you spent time at Perkins Coie, DLA Piper, Ackerman. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
Yeah, I got into, actually, funny story, I got into legal on accident. It was right after, the tragedies of 9/11. I was looking for a new job because I'd worked at a startup back then. It was like an interactive marketing agency. I was a project manager there, and I was looking for a new job. And the only one I could get at the time, because nobody was hiring, obviously, right, was the American Bar Association. It turned out being a great opportunity. Got some great experience there. Introduced me to law and some really great people. So I'm grateful that the opportunity that things sort of transpired the way they did. But so I spent a little time at the ABA doing a number of different things. And then I said, hey, I work with all these lawyers that are members of the association. I wonder what the in-house sort of law firm side of the coin looks like as far as other opportunities to expand. So that was when I made the jump over to Ackerman. I was able to use my connections to get some interviews at Ackerman and join there. Kind of got my feet wet in what the in-house law firm side of things looks like. And not too long after that, took the job at DLA. So I kind of grew up at DLA, and that's actually when I went back to grad school to get my MBA, was when I was at DLA. So I was working there full time and grad school at night. So, and then the other sort of fortuitous thing that happened that kind of landed me where I am now is the global financial crisis came, which just, I feel like I have these sort of a career that's punctuated by crises, right? But they were sort of inflection points for me. So what that really did was it enabled me to, again, I was looking for a job getting out of my MBA, finishing my MBA studies. I wanted to go into management consulting. And then, by virtue of the slowdown in the economy, there wasn't too many opportunities in management consulting at the time when I was interviewing. But what had happened was, the legal industry was undergoing this transformation at that point, right? Where there was a lot of pressure from clients to have more transparency, more predictability, to do things differently. All the things that we still actually, have, misalignments on in a lot of cases these days, but a lot of progress has been made since then. So anyway, that was the opportunity that I kind of ended up being able to seize to go, okay, how do I take this industry knowledge that I have, and then also the frameworks and principles from my studies towards my MBA to go, how do I deploy those towards a new problem and a new set of challenges to overcome. So fast forward to today, I started doing the pricing, profitability, LPM budgeting, all that stuff in 2009, and it wasn't even my real job. It was my sort of side job that I was recruited to do internally. And then in 2011, they wanted to make it a real, they said, hey, these need to be functions. So you're the only one that knows how to do this. Do you want to do it? And I'm like, sure. So here I am today. So yeah, I've been in legal for, that's a long way of saying it, but 24 years now. So kind of scary, makes me feel really old, but yeah. So
yeah, legal has a certain amount of gravity to it. It's kind of like you get in and it's like the Roach Motel, that you come in, but you don't come out.
Yeah. It's a very, or, you could also say it's like a Liam Neeson thing. Like you have a very specific set of skills that you could translate elsewhere, but it seems like, once you develop those capabilities, you seem well served to keep them focused in the subject matter area. So
I'm sure
Anyway,
all
so
my I'm sure all my customers are going to love that I just equated law firms to the Roach Motel. You check in, but you don't check out.
that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, that makes my taken thing sound better, even though that's not a great topic either.
I'm not for everybody. I've come to terms with that. I try and be authentic, and
Same
especially
way.
online, and
Yeah, for sure.
like I said, you don't win them all.
Yeah.
Well, I got my MBA around the same time as you did, and I was at Bank of America at the time, and I didn't even get a cup of coffee when I graduated. Like I did it for myself and really
Yeah.
didn't expect any huge doors to just swing open as a result of that. But it did give me a basis for, as an entrepreneur, you don't really use a lot of those skills, but as you start to build a bigger business, some of those skills and analytics and understanding, how businesses differentiate themselves, a lot of the reading that I did during the MBA program was really helpful. So
Yeah.
it's this is not on the agenda, but I'm curious of your take on this, which might be a little bit of a controversial question. But what do you think about lawyers as business people? In my experience, I've had a real mixed bag with that as a client, especially. So my wife and I own gyms here in St. Louis, and we own 5 of them. We moved to location, so I've had to negotiate 6 commercial retail leases. And I've had some real interesting commentary from lawyers, especially on the other side of the table, about just interesting topics that, from a academic perspective or a legal perspective, may make sense, but they don't make any sense from a business perspective. I don't know. What's your take on business skills that lawyers aren't really taught that as part of the JD, but they acquire those skills over time, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because it does vary case by case. Over my 20 some years now in the industry, I've worked with a number of lawyers who not only couldn't care less, but also resent the idea that there's a business component to this industry that we work in. They want to be sort of the artist out there, the guru, the subject matter expert that is unbound by the principles of economics or strategy or competition or all those things. And I understand that mindset because I've come across it a lot. And trying to apply the business principles in those situations is a little bit different than, I'd say, the other category of people. I'd say it's a spectrum, not 2 categories, like not 2 distinct buckets. But on the other side of the spectrum, you've got the folks that are, by nature, attorneys, very, very smart people, right? Obviously very curious, very intellectually curious, and want to learn about a lot of different things. So those folks that have that curiosity and bring that to, like, they come to the realization, like, I do what I do substantively to deliver legal services to corporations or whomever I'm representing. That's one piece of sort of the industry and what I bring to the table. And that's what I studied. I hope, at least in most cases, that's their passion, what they want to do, that is fulfilling for them. But the realities of, look, this is a business that we operate in. It's different when you have a shingle on Main Street compared to when you've got, you're a global firm with 78 offices in 47 countries. Like, there's a different operating model there that you have to acknowledge and sort of be able to embrace. So it's usually pretty easy when you can, after a while, to kind of be able to assess the personalities and sort of the hot button topics or where the interests lie with whomever it is that you're working with on the lawyer side. I mean, I've seen this on the, not only on the firm side, but also on the client side, where it's like, okay, they're thinking more statute and precedent, and I'm thinking process, levers, weightings, components, timelines. How do we find the intersection of those things so that we both get what we need out of it? One last thing I'll share on that. The conversations are interesting a lot of times because you'll be talking to somebody who's very engaged with the legal novelty of the novelty of the legal issue at hand and what that means to the client, or what it might mean to markets, or the the broader sort of business segment in general of its regulations, those type of things. And I'll be talking to them because they want to, they need some type of, whether it's how can we price this? How do we give transparency to the clients that we're working with so they know what we're doing? If it's reporting, what are some of the risk factors and financial implications and levers and all those things? They'll launch into these, I would say tangents, but they'll drill down on something that is a novel legal issue that I'm sure is fascinating to anybody that's got a passion for that. And I kind of have to take a step back. The analogy I use a lot of times is The Fugitive, when the movie The Fugitive, when Harrison Ford's like, I didn't kill my wife, and Tommy Lee Jones is like, I don't care. Like, that's not my job. I'm not worried about that, right? It's not so much that I don't care, but I don't need that level of context for what I need to do to help you. So you do learn some interesting things having those conversations, but then you have to kind of distill it down and go, what do I need in order to do my business piece that's going to help you, to deliver on those pieces as well as the substantive issues. So there's a lot of partnership, I think, that happens, and it just sort of takes different shapes depending on, what the situation might be and who you're dealing with.
Yeah. So the way I try and approach, so I've been an entrepreneur for 32 years. I started my first business when I was a third year undergrad, took a year off, built the business, and then finished my undergrad part-time at night. And and I was an operator for 22 of those 32 years. So I've had lots of interactions with lawyers over the years. And how I try and frame it up is like, for my legal partner, I'm going to make the risk reward decision. What I need you to tell me is, what's the risk?
Sure.
You don't have any visibility as my legal counsel on the reward, or limited visibility, right? Those are trade-offs that we make as business people. And there's all sorts of, ancillary, intangible dimensions to the problem. It's not a black and white conversation. I have to make those risk reward trade-offs as a business person, but you are, as my counsel, you are in the best position to tell me what risks exist. And then I decide which risks to take.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting when you think in an entrepreneurial context, because, over the years, I've done a lot of work with lawyers that represent startups, and I've been directly involved with the clients in those situations in some instances too. And the lawyer's role is to spot and minimize risk, but as a startup, you have to figure out where the right calculated risk is to take, because if you didn't take any risk, there'd be no startups, right? That sort of defeats the purpose. You have to go, I've got a vision, I have a passion, I've spotted an opportunity, I need to kind of push the bounds on something that hasn't been done before. And that's sort of diametrically opposed to what, the lawyer skill set is to spot those risks and sort of try and do away with them as much as possible. So it's an interesting sort of balance to strike as an entrepreneur. I can say to some extent, I'll give a slight plug here to Legal Value Networks. That's an industry organization that I'm one of the co-founders of. And it's for folks like myself, we call it like involved in the commercials of law or the business of law side of functions. And that could be at law firms or, large corporate legal departments, or, at our business partners too. We see, consultancies, technology providers and all that, where we kind of bring the community together to have these conversations about what needs to be done, right? So we started that as a new enterprise, and I have 6 partners on that. And we've had to have some of those decisions to make too. It's like, okay, well, what sort of, corporate structure do you want to have? What risk does that, impose? What limitations does that impose if you do that? So it really is, I enjoy those conversations and considerations, because it's fun to try and navigate what's the right, I keep using the word balance, but sort of what's the right mixture or recipe for what we need to get done versus what's not going to, land us in jail or get us fined or, those type of things. So,
yeah,
exactly.
You said something earlier too, that is a good segue into the first part of our first topic, which is the business of law versus, the practice of law, or a business versus a profession. And I am a big advocate of the fact that the distinction holds the industry back. I believe that the practice of law and business of law are tightly coupled, and hopelessly intertwined. The practice informs the business, and the business informs the practice, and you can't have one without the other. So what we were kicking around on LinkedIn, we were talking about the Big Four and the new alternative business structure legislation that is in Arizona and I believe Utah. And we were debating what the likelihood is of success, because we've all heard it before, right? You know, in the mid 2010s or late 2010s, there was a big push, didn't really go anywhere. The Legal Services Act in the UK was 2019, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Not much happened. In fact, the publicly traded firms there aren't doing great from what I've read. So I think that, I'll give my position first and then let you respond to that. I think that this time is going to be different. And what's different about this time than last time and back when ALSPs were really starting to, that acronym was everywhere. That for me was about 10 years ago. What's different is the means of legal production now is changing. And there are organizations like the Big Four, like KPMG, with 4,000 lawyers and armies of technologists and Lean Six Sigma black belts that are better positioned than any law firm is, and has resources in excess of what any law firm has in those, ancillary divisions. So now I don't think they're going to come in and eat big laws lunch. I'm not saying that at all. They're going to come in and focus on the blocking and tackling initially, and then I think they're going to work their way up the ladder. What is your perspective on this go round with the Big Four making another push?
I think it's an interesting, topic to sort of philosophize on and opine on. The way I analyze it, who knows? I guess we'll see how it works. I never claim that I'm right, but I claim to hopefully have some compelling reasons why I have the position I have. I just didn't necessarily see when the news started breaking about the Arizona license and KPMG's application for it, it didn't seem to me that the limiting factor or the bottleneck in sort of, unleashing the genie last time was, there's no way to have a entity in the U.S. legal system that can compete or deliver any type of related services in this area. I felt like the things that I saw, and I look, full disclosure, as in the last round of the 2018, 2019, 2020, when there was a lot of speculation that ALSPs were going to start eating big laws lunch, and then that didn't materialize really, right? I was, and still remain in some, I guess, to some degree, an advocate of, you can form a captive ALSP at a firm, so you've still got that same integration, because I guess what I'm saying is I buy into the concept or the model that, every service is a process, and you can try and, argue that in a number of different ways, but it is a series of activities that have to take place in overlapping timelines, and, there's dependencies and that type of stuff, but you can always deconstruct that into some organized process. I don't necessarily think that the Big Four have a monopoly on how to do that effectively. They do have resources, but again, sort of what I saw more as being the limiting factor was relationships and sort of synthesizing everything in a way that was superior to what was already in place, right? So a lot of what it seemed was limiting ALSPs the last go round was not the capabilities or the logic, it was the relationships and sort of the continuity of service, right? So as a firm, you could make some adjustments to how you did the work that would mimic or, reproduce some of the benefits that the ALSPs were proposing. And then if you put yourself in the client's seat, at least this is what I saw happening, the client goes, I could either hire these two entities and try and stick them together and make sure that they all talk when they need to talk and exchange data and all the protocols are correct and all that, or I can take the next best thing and stick with who I know knows all the high level stuff or all the sort of cream part, the real subject matter expertise piece of the work that I need, and accept or adopt their approaches to replicating what the Big Four is trying to build, right? So what it seemed like to me is, you could make the argument, and it's a valid one, that the Big Four has a very deep collection of resources, as you mentioned, from both money and people and expertise and talent, and they're very smart people there. So I'm in no way trying to slight that at all or disregard that. But you can effectively bring an aircraft carrier to a knife fight, right? Like you may not want to make those big changes right away. If from a service delivery standpoint, if you do perceive that there's more risk or less sort of coordination or collaboration that could result. We know lawyers are all risk averse, right? So that's what they're trained. That's why they're good at what they do. So that goes for in-house lawyers too. So I think it was just a big, it was an inhibitor. It's an inhibitor to adoption, to unbundle things, and then try and hope that they go together well for what seems to be, potentially cost savings, which I understand the importance of that. But anyway, I think to me, those are just some of the relevant sort of forces or considerations that I don't see how the current sort of headlines really overcome that coordination, collaboration, synthesis, continuity issue or the reputation issue. So I don't know. Actually, one last thing. I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but one last thing on that. I had a conversation with somebody about this a while back. The GCs at big companies don't think, what's our audit firm doing for the legal department when they want legal services? They go, hey, what's the right legal tool for this legal problem that we have? Let's find a way to make that fit the outcomes, or, to deliver the outcomes we need. Not like it just doesn't seem necessarily as intuitive in many cases. That could be changing. I'm not a general counsel, but in the past, I've heard that that's sort of also a barrier to grabbing market share. Is the GC is not going to go for a 20% potential savings. I'm going to go to my accountants or obviously the advisory arms of those firms to offset that sort of spend. So,
yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. Here's what I would. So all of those are headwinds for the Big Four. I'm going to throw out some tailwinds. Sure. See if you agree. So law firm leadership, the way law firm leadership comes to be is typically by lawyers working their way up the ranks and being the best at lawyering. Mm-hmm. It's a partnership model, and there are decision-making is very challenging. The culture at law firms is very slow. There's a great podcast snippet out there where Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz, he invented Netscape, now he's a VC, talks about a program called the Wild Ducks at IBM. And it was a group of, I think, 7 executives who, this is in the 90s when everybody at IBM wore suit and tie, and they wore cowboy boots, put their feet up on the table, and they really had carte blanche within the organization to bypass processes that slowed them down in innovation efforts. Mm-hmm. That won't happen ever at a law firm, in my opinion, just based on culture. Another I guess, tailwind for Big Four is the fact that only lawyers can own law firms, at least in 48 of the 50 states. How do you recruit somebody from Google or Amazon or Microsoft, some executive with the tech and leadership skills that are so hard to find, especially in a single individual, to come work in your law firm? You gonna give them stock options? I mean, maybe you could leverage shadow equity, what have you. And then, just the governance model, that partnership versus a traditional publicly traded company that's got a board of directors that installs and oversees management, creates and those installations, those roles are filled based on merit. It's not, are you the best lawyer? It's, are you the best butt in that seat? And that's not always how it happens in law firms. So I see that as a huge advantage. Also, attitudes towards tech. Law firms, and I've been selling into this space for 17 years, and I used to have hair like you. It's their attitude towards tech investment they don't look at it as an investment. They look at it as an expense that needs to be minimized. Now, is that going to change with AI? It is, but these are cultural changes, and not Porter, but who was it that said strategy eats or culture eats strategy for breakfast?
I don't know, but I say it all the time. I need to find out who that is because I say that all the time.
Peter Drucker.
Yeah. Yes, there you go. Yeah.
Peter Drucker. So, all of those things are going to help the Big Four, I think, in very significant ways because, I've talked about it a million times on this podcast. I don't know if you and I talked about it, but the biggest law firm in the world is K&E by revenue, about $7.2 billion. The floor for the Fortune 500 is about $7.6 billion. There's not one law firm that would qualify to be in the Fortune 500 based on revenue if they were public, which they're not. So why? And all of these factors limit scale. The lateral movement within law firm, big law is like hotels for lawyers. They can pick up their book of business. That doesn't exist in accounting firms. You sign a non-compete. I got lots of friends at Accenture and EY from my banking days. And so that lateral mobility is much more limited. It keeps people, it increases retention, certainly retention on the client side. Can't just pick up a book of business and walk across the street. So I don't know. How do you think those factors are going to figure in?
So there's a lot of things to unpack there. I would say, it's sort of, I think one of the foundational issues that all these things are symptomatic of is that the partnership model is a really friction heavy type of model to try and have a unified vision and a sort of execution plan to achieve right? So when you talk about, decision authority and all that and investment decisions, which actually, the Big Four are partnerships too, right? But I think the scale is different, and there's other, I think, centralization of authority there that is
totally,
to their, on their an advantage to them. One of the interesting phenomenon that I've seen related to this in particular is, we talk about tech investments or integration, implementation of technology into service delivery and all that. There are merits to that. There are, obviously we talked about some of the challenges. Some of them are cultural. Some of them are market-based challenges. And here's why I say that. We had LVN, so we had a survey that we've done every year in collaboration with Blickstein Group, where we look at what do in-house legal operations executives say on challenges that they face every year, and what do their counterparts on the law firm side say in terms of, here's what I see as my issues in the market with getting the services that we need or delivering the services that we need to the clients. So one of the data points we found was that 41% of law firm executives cite that their clients either forbid or discourage them to use AI on their work, right?
I got it up right here. I'm looking
got it?
at
Okay,
it.
good, cool. Yeah. So here's the dilemma that creates, right?
Yeah.
If you're in leadership at a law firm and you go, man, there's some huge potential changes, that are sort of materializing in the industry and how we do things. We need to stay ahead of those. Or at least stay current with those and make sure we're adopting what we can and we're not kind of caught flat-footed. The trick is if it's, if that 41% number is reflective of the market, it's hard to make a wholesale investment decision and then get the other, all the partners in the firm to buy into it on top of that, because it's going to come out of their pockets, like in the short term, right?
Yeah.
And, cash-based systems in a partnership business model, it's hard to make long-term investments that have payouts later. The mobility thing is a big component of that too, right? If I'm a partner and I go, hey, I got to give up 10% of or 20% of, I don't know, whatever the percentage might be, fill in the number as you please, of my bonus this year to go into tech investments that I know that there's mergers happening all the time. My practice might fit better somewhere else in 18 months. And why would I be a fool and stay here and sort of limit myself otherwise? So what's my incentive to pay into these investments that are going to be for the good of, the longer term folks that are around, where I don't have any guaranteed, benefit from that. So it's a tricky all around for a lot of those reasons. But one, like what isn't what is sort of an equalizer, at least at this point, is in my experience, and I like to think I'm relatively well traveled in some of these, corners of the industry. None of the really cool, high, firepower type of solutions that are out there now that are leveraging a lot of the, cutting edge, more provocative technologies and capabilities are cheap. And they're not cheap for the big four. They're not cheap for big law. So what I wonder is, different business strategies as far as like competition goes. The big four could commit to a battle of attrition where they're just going to outspend law firms. And by doing that, take big losses for however many number of years they project. A lot of smart people there are trying to figure these things out. And I'm sure they have. So I'm just, here speculating with absolutely no data on my side to back it up. But I would think there's got to be some exit point where you go, if we haven't achieved, this level of adoption yet by this time point, and we've, invested X amount of dollars at that point, we need to that's going to be our sort of fish or cut bait moment where we have to decide what is the next, what does the distance to the next milestone look like? And is it more promising, or else why should we keep dumping billions into these technologies or these developers or these people that are trying to go in and implementation teams or, ways of trying to spur adoption amongst both law firms that we could be selling to and corporate legal departments, if you're talking about the scale question. So it's really that is a reality of trying to take market share from a competitive standpoint, is that sometimes you have to buy it. And these are accounting firms as well as consulting firms. Hopefully they have a pretty good, handle on what their cost basis is, on what their investment sort of strategies are, and sort of when they're not working and what they need to do to make, to pivot when necessary. So I don't know what those numbers look like or what that time horizon looks like, but the reality is those things are really expensive. And that's, nobody's sort of shielded from that. Will that change over time as maturity increases? One would assume that's kind of how the model works, right? But then that'll still be the same playing field for law firms too. So I don't know. It's an interesting, all these things are interesting. I'm thinking of the different angles and levers, and who knows if I'm right or who's right, but just the way some of the forces I think stack up based on the dynamics now.
Yeah, and the relationship piece is real, and but that bridge or that gap can be bridged. Mm-hmm. The 4,000 attorneys at KPMG all probably made their way up the ranks in big law. They have relationships too. Now, do they have relationships on the inside counsel side? Probably not to the same extent as partners who are working with them every day, if these are internally facing legal resources. But they have other relationships, right? So they've got huge enterprise tax and audit relationships and consulting advisory relationships that could be leveraged effectively, especially above the CLO's head, right?
Okay. Sure.
So that getting at bats isn't going to be a problem for the big four, in my opinion. And then you've got smaller players that are entering the space. I think you and I kicked it around a little bit. Aprio and Radin Law in Arizona, just 50 attorney law firm, 3,000 employee accounting firm, not big. They're now doing a JV and calling it Aprio Legal. So it's not just the big four who are interested in this. I think they're looking at the landscape and going, man, law firms are slow to move. And you're 1,000% correct that it is often the client that holds them back. Mm-hmm. It's not only true with AI, it's true with AFAs, which we're going to talk about. It was absolutely the case with cloud. You had clients, especially in the financial services space, that are under a tremendous amount of regulatory scrutiny with respect to third-party counter risk, and they just hammer with OCG, ridiculous. They're in the cloud, but you can't be in the cloud when the reality is the cloud is usually a lot safer than a law firm managed on-prem environment.
Exactly. Totally.
It doesn't make sense. So yeah, I acknowledge that it is often the client, but there's a lot of overlap. If you look at the Venn diagram with ALSPs, law firms, and even BPOs, right? So I did some work in default services years ago. In fact, I'm I'm going to be talking to the that law firm is no longer in existence, but the founder's a good friend of mine. They had a BPO in India. Default service work is very, process oriented. We did some neat stuff over there. Actually got written up a cover story by the ABA Journal in like 2014. We had monitors up. They had like 7 areas, departments that were responsible for all sorts of pride. We had monitors up there with control charts and showing when processes were going out. It was pretty damn cool, especially in 2014.
For sure.
The ABA flew down, took pictures, wrote an article. It was pretty neat. But there's a lot of overlap. So these lines aren't clear exactly. They're a little murky, and where things are going to end up shifting is, an interesting conversation like we're having now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things I use a lot, because it's just something I've lived for now, however many, I guess over 2 decades, is, for whatever reason, the business model in the legal services sector tends to be pretty resilient. So it changes over time, but it changes really slow. So I haven't yet seen one disruptive force that forces a revolution on anybody. I've seen evolution, and it's going to happen. In what degree does that, start taking share from what the incumbent players are versus, one of the things, this was something that came up in conversation, in the last round of Big Four is going to, take everything over, was I said, the law firms for, debatably, depending on who you are or what position you want to take, you have to admit that if you look at what the financial performance has been, the growth of that segment of the economy, year over year, aside, despite all the headwinds and complications and friction of doing things in a much more sophisticated, business sort of oriented procedure or framework, law firms have been at least relatively effective at pivoting and sort of evolving as much as they need to be able to maintain, strong relationships, strong, financial performance across any number of sort of metrics you look at, right? And it is sort of astounding as you go, wow, these things are happening. Why are they able to still, have such great results at the end of the year? I don't understand it, but there is, and maybe that again goes back to that X factor of what's the value of a relationship. You think about sort of, in M&A, when they do valuations, brand is a value that is sort of very, amorphous in nature to go, what makes a brand and how do you put numbers on it? There's something to that familiarity aspect that must, be carrying it forward. So I don't disagree with the idea that things will change. It should, because from a logic and rational thought standpoint, doesn't make sense to do a lot of things manually just because you've always done them that way. But you have to make sure that what you're replacing them with from an automation standpoint is at least as good or predictable or, faster. There's got to be some, additional benefits you're reaping from that in order to make it sort of viable. I keep saying the old cheap, fast and good framework. You can pick 2. That makes a difference, right? You can do something fast and cheap, but it might not be good. You can do something fast and good, but it won't be cheap. That very simple concept or framework is relevant here. It applies. There's really, I don't know how to really break that. So, all of these things, I think they're going to be influencing factors, and you will continue to see this evolution, but it's really interesting to see, in spite of all, other sort of market forces, there has been some resilience, and ability of law firms to counter threats, either by, sort of, if you can't beat them, join them sort of thing, right? Like I don't think anybody on law firm side is going, forget all these legal tech companies and all this stuff that helps you automate or streamline or give better. Who needs all that? We got some really smart people. And I know that, they're a little slow sometimes, getting things done and whatever, but that's your best bet. Nobody's really trying to make that case. There's some level of, all right, let's make sure we can stay current with the times and adjust as we need to. And it's been a relatively effective strategy so far. So who knows if that happens forever, but that's what's been happening. So
Yeah, law firms are doing great. Profits rose by 17% last year. Revenue increased by 13%, and rates increased by 9.
So
So,
I think one of the reasons, one of the drivers behind those numbers is the fact that, we talked about the difference between, the profession and the business, right? The last 10, 12 years, there's been huge investments made into professional management functions and teams and executives, right? I think those are really, not to, it may sound like a biased opinion coming from me, but I think those are a large factor in being able to, remain competitive or being able to remain, as effective at doing what you're in business to do, that they have sort of, exercise the opportunity to do to exert specialization of labor and go, look, if I'm the best M&A lawyer in the, financial services industry in the world, that's great. Don't diminish that by making me the chairman of the firm. And now I don't get to do that anymore. And I got to make decisions on how to manage an enterprise that isn't really in line with where I contribute the most value. You bring on the people that do know how to orchestrate those resources and processes and make everything sort of fire on all 8 cylinders the way it should be. Everything's in its own lane. So,
well, and how you probably have a really good perspective on this, and I may be in the finance world, this may be a little different, but how empowered are these C-suite roles? Like, for example, Chief Innovation Officer. Talk a lot about that role. They're our customer, and you've got some really, really bright people sitting in those seats. And when I look at the amount of true innovation that's happening in legal, it's not a lot. There is some, but the difference between improvement and innovation is improvement is incremental, right? It's focused on efficiency. Innovation is a disruptor. It's fun doing things differently at a fundamental level. So, I wonder, and again, I think this is going to vary by function, but I'm wondering how empowered, there's a lot of innovation theater going on in legal. Let's be real. I told you, I got a dear friend of mine. She's the director of innovation at like a 350 attorney law firm. And she was doing iManage upgrades 2 weeks ago. And I was like, what the hell are you doing?
What are you doing?
This is IT's job. She's like, I am IT, NKM, and innovation. Yeah. And, that's shame on that XCOM for just slapping a title on somebody's role and not empowering them to actually go and do what is their charter.
Yeah. I mean, so we saw the same thing happen sort of in the little niche of the industry where I've kind of resided, right? Was, a lot of firms earnestly were like, hey, let's make sure we remain competitive. Let's, make sure we get the right people in place that have that finger on the pulse or have the right ideas that we should be trying. And this goes for, for other functions as well. But let's, genuinely invest and work on adopting and propagating those practices and principles throughout the firm so that we're, remaining as nimble and as responsive to the market as possible. Then there's other ones that said, I keep reading all these things about these new titles that they're hiring. And I saw that, so-and-so across the street has a director of pricing or an innovation person, whatever, right? We should probably get one of those without any real sort of,
commitment.
Commitment from the top, but also, the ability to drive those practices or best practices or concepts throughout the firm so that you're able to, you talk about scale, like internal scale, so you can scale the benefits of those things. It ends up really being difficult, and when you think about some of the capabilities that sort of develop, certainly as a function of technology solutions, right? I'm a huge fan of anything that does cool stuff fast and right and all those things. I'm a big proponent of all those solutions and coming up with new solutions to problems. The Legal Tech Fund, summit that we went to, I love sitting in those pitch sessions and watching the ideas people come up with and the problems they're solving. So I think there's certainly a play for that. But what I think you see a lot of times is the sacred cow of sort of the service delivery piece ends up being protected till the last possible moment. And what ends up getting exploited by technology solutions first and very effectively, which I think also, manifests in those performance numbers you see, is how do you deploy some of these solutions from the operational side, internally at the firm, right?
Yeah.
So how do we leverage those things? If the lawyers won't use it, or the clients don't want us to use it, or the clients don't know whether they want us to use it, let's start, proof of concepting this on other processes internally that help us get, faster, quicker, more nimble, more, creative, and all those things, more effective.
HR, finance, marketing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Agreed. So we're almost out of time, but I did want to, you and I had a really interesting conversation around some of the things making it difficult for law firms to innovate, and the fragmentation in the Gen AI space, and knowing who's going to be the long-term winner.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at throughout the history of business, the leader, the initial leader in a particular category is rarely the long-term winner of that category, right? They kind of pave the way for some. I mean, there's a million examples of this: MySpace, BlackBerry, Netscape, Lotus 1-2-3.
Second mover advantage, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, or maybe even third or fourth mover.
Yeah.
So as it does, I understand there's gridlock right now in firms with, like, where do we invest? Where do we spend our time? Where do we spend our money? And you had some thoughts on how that's making things difficult.
Yeah, that sort of inhibits adoption of tools or capabilities as well, because as is sort of a natural progression of things, when you've got capabilities that are sort of starting to gain more maturity in a market, you're going to have a lot of new entrants in the market trying to leverage those capabilities and find their niche, or find their audience, find their customer base, right? So as a firm, I work a lot with our innovation team. We have a weekly call. We source projects for each other. We help develop pilots together and everything. It's a good symbiosis. So I'm kind of a front row seat on this, how it goes at my current firm, and I've seen it at past firms too. If you identify a need based on, okay, look, we see a process here that looks like it would benefit from some of the different capabilities that are coming online in the market now, and then you go to market to try and find the best tool to do it. Well, you've got, we used the idea of Venn diagrams earlier. You've got a series of circles. It's not even just 2 or 3. You've got a whole chain of circles that are overlapping to varying degrees within a certain sort of niche or target outcome or target function, right? So when you have to make an investment decision, and you know that these are all, in most cases, emerging growth companies, which is where innovation comes from, and that's great. But you also know, okay, we can't necessarily invest in these things with big dollars if we don't know if that particular solution out of the 7 that are somewhat overlapping and relevant to what we need to do is going to be around in 6 months or 12 months, or who they're going to get bought by. I know a number of people who were very loyal clients or customers of some solutions, and then that solution got bought by a larger platform, and it got sunsetted, or it got rolled into something else, and that wasn't compliant with the financial system they were on, or the other dashboarding tools they had. So then they had to migrate. So it's when you have this fragmentation of options, this highly fragmented market, it does add a level of complexity, and also sort of risk aversion, where you go, okay, look, I kind of feel like, based on the analysis we've done internally, that we could change some things with these particular workflows or pockets within these practices. And there's probably maybe even some, level of interest within the lawyer ranks there that we could get some adoption there. But then you sort of get stuck putting it on the sidelines, because you're like, I don't know what to buy to bring in. And if we tried to build it, then that's, you run into other, issues and complications. So that does sort of inhibit or slow the maturity curve, I would say. And then also by association, the adoption curve with those things. So it's tricky. It's very tricky.
No, you're 100% right. Yeah, I've seen it a million times. A legal tech vendor gets bought by one of the big, one of the big practice management solutions, and they take it out back and shoot it in the head. Sometimes they do it. Sometimes they do it slow. Sometimes and it's not just legal tech, man. This happens everywhere.
Sure.
Well, man, this has been a great conversation. There was a bunch of stuff we didn't get to, but I feel like we had some really good dialogue here. So this was a lot of fun.
Likewise, I enjoyed it. Like I say, great talking shop. And the most fun thing is, to talk about things you can't be wrong about because, who knows what the future holds, right? So I enjoy that. It adds a level of sort of engagement and fun to the day. So I appreciate, again, the invitation and the engagement on LinkedIn, just in the discussion that kind of brought us together, to have this conversation. So
100%. Yeah, man, absolutely. All right. It was a great chat. Hopefully we'll get to chat again soon, maybe in person.
Yeah. Love that. Look forward to it.
All right. Sounds good.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content.